Dumb Husky and his white cat Shizun. Chapter 306. Shi Shengpeak. Have pity on my different race. Heaven and earth instantly changed color. The demonic chi was like a sharp arrow piercing through the clouds, directly shooting towards the distant gate of time and space, life and death. The continuous torrential rain that lasted for more than 10 days suddenly stopped. Just a moment ago, it was overflowing, but in the blink of an eye, not a single drop was left. Some people's lips trembled and they were hoping to get lucky as they shakily asked, what's going on? No one answered the question. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the direction of the rift, but the black hole that had occupied most of the space remained undisturbed for a while. The people waited nervously. Their hearts were pounding. There were no abnormalities. Nothing unusual happened. The rain has stopped. Did nothing happen? It should be a false alarm. Everything should be fine now. One by one, people let out a sigh of relief and their tight cheeks relaxed. However, just at this moment that the ground under their feet began to shake all of a sudden. What's wrong now? Looking up, they saw the black hole of the gate of time and space, life and death started to expand at an alarming speed, engulfing the remaining cumulus clouds in the sky. Following that, a sharp whistle broke through the sky, causing them all to be dumbstruck. After cutting across the dome, the phoenix bird flapped its wings, blocking out the sun. It was as large as the heavenly lake and its claws were as large as mountains. Just a single feather was over 100 meters long. With a flap of its wings, godly winds billowed and countless plants were uprooted. As for Mount Kunlun, which was the closest to it, the snow had melted and the icicles had shattered. Chirp, chirp. In the blink of an eye, the divine bird had settled down on top of Mount Kunlun. It began to cry and the sound it produced was exactly the kind of whistle that would appear whenever the gate of time and space, life and death opened and closed. This is. One of the cultivators cried out miserably, it's Shi Huang. It's the ancient phoenix. This was an ancient mythical beast that did not even have a painting scroll. Later on, it went to Goshen's palace, where it moved mountains and filled the sea. When it flapped its huge wings in the 9 heavens, its speed was faster than lightning, far faster than the light of dawn. Chu Wanning mumbled, so, was the guardian of the gate of time and space, life and death had always been it. The instant it stepped into the crevice, the phoenix began to cry out. It rushed through time, returning to the past or the future, but its body was too large, its speed was too fast, so the person who opened the gate of time and space, life and death were unable to see its shadow. They only have the time to hear its cry and it had already brought the person to the time and space that they wanted to go to. The phoenix stood on Mount Kunlun, looking down at the earth with its red and gold eyes. It suddenly spoke in human language, sounding out a warning bell, the heavens shall punish anyone who goes against the order of the mortal world. After speaking, it rose into the air and opened its 9 golden wings one by one, dragging them along the ground. With a flap of its wings, the human world shook and the hills crumbled. If it wasn't the apocalypse, the scene would have been magnificent. Chu Wanning snapped, retreat. At the same time, almost every sex elder and sect leader reacted in the same way. Retreat. To survive was their instinct, so they did not need to be reminded anymore. The cultivators who were like ants and mustard seeds in front of Shi Huang immediately flew up on their swords, fleeing in the opposite direction of Shi Huang. Mei Hangxiu rushed to Chu Wanning's side, brushing away the messy hair on his forehead and said, Grand Master, please ask them to retreat to the boundary of the rift. Before Chu Wanning could say anything, he added, this mortal world has long passed on. For the past 8 years, Xuemeng and I have been thinking of a way to minimize disaster when this day arrives. So, on the day that the 2 red dust were cleared, we used the black tortoise armor to set up a formation around the gate of time and space, life and death. The heavy black tortoise armor was a slough left behind from the black tortoise that was as old as the first phoenix. With it as its foundation, the protective barrier cast down by the armor would be thousands of times stronger. However, according to the rumors, this kind of slough was in the Eastern Sea, a place where there was a 9 out of 10 chance of death. Just what kind of difficulties and dangers had the Mei brothers and Xuemen gone through in the mortal world to be able to bring it back? Mei Hangxiu said, "Grandmaster, please have everyone retreat over there and return to their own world. This is the calamity that is born from this world and lifetime. It should end here." The phoenix in the distance had flapped its wings and soared high. Then, it transformed into a streak of red light between heaven and earth. Its speed was so fast that no one could see it, but in the blink of an eye, the Yellow River had been emptied, the Yangtze River ran in reverse, and the vast waters of the ocean were stirred up to hundreds of thousands of feet high, as if a vast ocean was being lifted up from the seabed, rushing towards the mainland. The waters of the Great Sea came from the heavens, and the 9 prefectures became desolate in the blink of an eye. Chu Wanning wanted to retreat, but he discovered that the power of the flood was even faster than the speed of people escaping on their flying swords. In a blink of an eye, they were already closing in on where they were. Perhaps in the blink of an eye, it would catch up with the majority of the retreating people. He made a prompt decision and said to Mei Hangxiu, "You and Xuemeng lead them away first. I will stay here and buy some time." As he spoke, he summoned the rising dragon talisman again and soared into the sky. Chu Wanning said sternly, "Tianwen. 10,000 coffins." The willow vine rose up from the ground. He bit his finger and dripped some blood on it. He shouted, "Build a wall." The vines pressed down into wicker and the willow branches coiled around other willow branches. They overlapped and overlapped, forming layers upon layers of lush green. In an instant, it became a towering wall that stretched out to the horizon. "Juga, come forth." Juga was lying on his knees, radiating light from his palms. Chu Wanning strummed the guqin and amidst the flowing sound, golden rays of light wrapped around the wicker-like array wall, making it even more impenetrable. By the time he finished doing all of this, the surging torrent had already reached him. Hua! A splash hit the wall and turned the sky upside down. Chu Wanning turned his face to the side and said to Mei Hangxiu, "Go on." Mei Hangxiu had not expected such a situation. Although his heart was burning with anger, he had no other choice but to bow to Chu Wanning and disappear into the hazel forest. For a moment, the cultivator army retreated. Chu Wanning tried his best to defend. The torrential flood roared, trying to tear down the dam made by Tianwen and Juga. On the path of martyrdom, the butterfly-boned beauty feast slowly opened the door to the demon realm. The demonic world's crimson and dark purple clouds blended with the world's despair. The door was completely opened. Standing at the very front was Shimei, the first person to be enveloped by the pure demonic qi. That kind of aura made his whole body tremble. His whole body felt comfortable and he couldn't help but inhale the demonic qi greedily. The withered spirit core in his chest had finally recovered after coming into contact with the magical aura. A surge of power belonging to the demons finally surged through his body. So this was the feeling of having a strong spiritual energy. He finally felt it. He finally felt it. The ecstasy caused his eyes to light up and a beast-like glint appeared on his handsome face. Just like him, there were also all the people of the Butterfly-Boned Beauty Feast clan behind him. Those clansmen who had lost their spiritual cores due to the lack of demonic qi and were powerless finally obtained great strength that belonged to them at this moment. An old man with a stooped body and a spotless beard slowly appeared at the entrance of the demon realm. His crimson eyes swept across the crowd, and then, his shriveled skin puckered up as he grinned, "Ayo, I've been waiting here for over 4,000 years. Even the gatekeepers above have been annihilated, but I haven't seen any butterfly-boned beauty feast capable of doing this." He leaned on his walking stick and said with satisfaction, all right, you have done a lot to oppose the heavenly realm. Not bad, not bad." As he finished speaking, he glanced at the collapsing world and smiled, revealing his black and yellow teeth. The old demon turned around and made way for the butterfly-boned beauty feast clan. With a trembling voice, he said, "This old one greets you all on your return to your homeland." Behind them, the waters surged, but that was already a mortal matter. What did that have to do with the demons? Shimei turned around and looked at Chu Wanning, who was trying his best to fight against heaven's retribution. Was this bravery or foolishness? However, it was probably only because of Chu Wanning's stupidity that caused him to be unable to calm down. As he was about to leave, Shimei couldn't help but recall that year when Elder Yuheng had seen him home under an umbrella. At that time, they saw an earthworm crawling on the side of the Nahi Bridge. Chu Wanning gave it a casual glance and waved his sleeve. The earthworm was wrapped in a golden light and returned back into the vegetation. "Elder, what are you doing?" Chu Wanning was expressionless. "He's blocking the way." This reason was naturally flimsy. Shimei laughed. "Elder, you truly are kind. But when it rains, the ground is stuffy, so you should put it back in the ground. After a while, it will come out again and crawl outside, and then it will be blocking the elder's way again." Chu Wanning paused for a moment. There seemed to be a slight crease between his eyebrows. "I never knew that." He then lowered his eyes and looked at Shimei. "You know quite a lot." Shimei smiled shyly and said, "Earthworms are earth dragons. They are usually used for medicine. I know a little about their habits. I only know these things that aren't very useful." The two continued to walk forward, and as a result, Shimei discovered that even though Chu Wanning understood, he still cleaned up the little things that were in his way. In the end, he didn't know whether to laugh or cry, so he decided to help. Chu Wanning looked at him with a stack of books in his arms, but still managed to bend down and said, "Why? They're blocking the elder's way." In the clear rain, Shimei looked back at him and said gently, "This disciple will teach them to be a little more obedient." Chu Wanning shook his head and walked over. Once again, he put the oiled paper umbrella over Shimei. "Don't run around, you'll get wet." The way back was neither long nor short. As the two walked side by side, it would be awkward if they don't talk about anything. Shimei asked gently, "Elder, are you always so good?" His brown eyes rolled down and his phoenix-like eyes became majestic. Chu Wanning's face was expressionless. "What are you saying?" At this moment, he could see that Elder Yuheng wasn't as heartless as the rumors had said. He laughed. "Elder clearly knows that some things are useless, but you still want to do it." Chu Wanning did not answer and just walked on silently. Just when Shimei thought that he wouldn't pay any more attention to him, Chu Wanning said, "When I meet a beggar on the road, I knew that a little money doesn't necessarily mean that they will be able to get out of their predicament, so shouldn't I give them any alms? When encountering a spiritual beast on the way, do you know that you can release it back into the forest? After it's been rescued, it may enter another snare or not in the future, but does that mean I should just leave it alone?" Shimei gently said, "I understand what you mean now, Elder. Thank you for your teachings." He was so gentle, yet Chu Wanning was actually a little embarrassed. He coughed lightly and said, "However, the earthworms. They are really just blocking the way." Shimei was stunned and raised his head to look at the side of his face. His expression was obviously cold, but his ears were red. Suddenly, he felt it was so adorable. Thus, Shimei pursed his lips and spoke with a voice as calm as water, "Great Elder, you are very kind. I believe that I must also have pity for the other living beings." He paused for a moment before suddenly asking, "Oh right, I've read something in the book today that I don't understand, but I have no Shizun to ask. Can the elders clear up this disciple's confusion?" At least they no longer had to embarrassedly talk about saving living beings. Chu Wanning seemed relieved of a great burden and nodded, "Go ahead." Gyu's Medicine Sutra encompasses everything, and there are many cultivation methods that caused this disciple to be flabbergasted. Among them, the most puzzling is a type of sacred medicine that rapidly injects the essence into the spiritual core. After ingesting it, it can cause Chu Wanning's face darkened for some reason. He interrupted, "You want this medicine? Elder, do you know which kind it is?" In the early days of the cultivation world, this medicine was highly respected. All large and small sects would go to the medicine sect to buy it. Chu Wanning narrowed his eyes. "How could I not know?" Observing his expression, Shi Mei then said, "This disciple is not interested in that medicine, but seeing the ingredients needed for the pill was the flesh and blood of the butterfly-boned beauty feast, I am somewhat puzzled. Is the butterfly-boned beauty feast counted as human or beast?" Chu Wanning didn't hesitate at all. He frowned and answered the disciple's question with a solemn expression. "They're human." He did not even say count as human, but directly said that they're human without thinking. Before Shi Mei could reply, Chu Wanning glanced at the book about Gai Yuye's medicine sect written on the scroll on his chest, before putting it on his palm. "Elder, the teachings of Gai Yuye's sect are hard to distinguish whether it's ethical or not. Perhaps you shouldn't start your study with it. Tomorrow, you can go to the Compendium Pavilion and borrow Elder Tanlang's writings, maybe it's more appropriate." Shi Mei lowered his head and said, "As for the books in the Compendium Pavilion, it would be difficult for me to borrow them as all of them required permission of a disciple's Shizun." Chu Wanning was stunned for a moment. He thought about how this child had been in the sect for quite some time, but because of his low talent, no one would take him. Not even Elder Suanji, who is the most tolerant. In the gentle breeze and drizzling rain, he untied the lily-white jade on his waist. "Take it. If the people from the Compendium Pavilion ask, just show them my token." Chu Wanning warned again, "You should choose your reading materials well. Don't go down the wrong path just because you read the wrong book." Shi Mei wanted to receive the jade pendant with both hands, but there were too many scrolls in his arms. A single hand was tantamount to treading on the wrong path. He was at a loss of what to do and flushed red to his ears. Chu Wanning half knelt down, and in an instant, he was only slightly taller than an immature child. He lowered his long eyelashes and tied the jade pendant around Shi Mei's waist. Chu Wanning was expressionless as he was doing all of this, as if he was trying to take care of an earthworm blocking the way with his hand. If it were any other elder, they would definitely not lend their library token to any disciple they were unfamiliar with. This was the rule. However, Chu Wanning was not a person who lived by the rules. "All right." After attaching the jade pendant to Shi Mei, he stood up once more and lowered his hand that had been used as the result of his year-round repair of golems. "Let's go." The young child took a deep breath. He didn't know why he had to take that deep breath, but if he didn't, something in his chest might come up and make him cry. In truth, he felt wronged. Whether it was as a butterfly-boned beauty feast or as a disciple lacking in spiritual energy, he had never been treated so kindly. In the past, he didn't think much of it. In any case, he was already used to it. In his eyes, these people were nothing more than extremely ugly butchers. However, there was really someone who stopped and told him they're human. Someone really did stop and just gave him their own token that even direct disciples might not be able to obtain. For some reason, that heart of his that had been tempered with countless times suddenly felt an excruciating pain. Only then did he finally feel wronged. All along, he had endured too much. Shi Mei knew that although he looked gentle and polite, that was just a mask he made for himself after seeing through the danger. He hid behind this mask, defending himself with gentleness, avoiding it with kindness. He seemed kind to everyone, but in reality, no one was able to immerse themselves in his heart. His heart was already filled with hatred for the sake of the butterfly-boned beauty feast clan, so he would no longer feel any warmth. However, when he went back that day to write a disciple invitation, he sketched it out with some rare sincerity. When the letter was finished, he put down the broken bamboo pen and looked at the lamp that had turned into a pool. He felt that in his life, besides revenge and returning home, there was also an unexpected pleasant surprise. This surprise might be dangerous for him. However, at that time, he felt that a little tenderness might be harmless, and it wouldn't change the biggest wish in his heart. At this moment, Shimei turned his head back to look at his former tenderness. He didn't know what to feel in his heart. Anger? Sadness? It was not as simple as that. Their path was different. In the end, the other could not scheme against others. Shimei paused for a moment, but still said with a hint of ridicule, "Shizun, look." No matter who it was, in front of heaven's mandate, they couldn't help themselves from competing. You and me, man and demon, are all the same. These words were spoken very softly. Chu Wanning stood high up in the air, so it was impossible for him to hear them. However, as soon as Shimei said it, he felt relieved in his heart. Afterwards, he led the 1,000 butterfly-boned beauty feasts over to the majestic and vast gate to the demon realm. They're going home. The old devil guarding the gate was naturally at the front. He was very polite and respectful to Shimei as he greeted him after he entered the gate. "Young master, please wait." "Why?" "The devil world is divided into different grades according to the bloodline of the family. Since young master is returning to his hometown, his origin must be tested first so you could return to your sect and reunite with your ancestors." Shimei said expressionlessly, "Aren't the butterfly-boned beauty feast the descendants of the race of Gushin's mother? What else is there to test?" The old gatekeeper said, "The clan of Gushin's mother has long been taken off the demon registry. After young master and the rest of you return to the demon realm, you will have to arrange registrations according to the mixed blood of the remaining families in their lineage." Shimei frowned. Even though he found this troublesome, he did not know how long he could last until he saw that Chu Wanning was on the thin side. And behind him, there were still thousands of people waiting to enter the demon realm. They nodded, "Then let's hurry up." The old demon waved his hand and a scepter with the head of a beast appeared in his hand. He chanted an incantation, and 100 red ribbons of light floated out of the beast's mouth, like a brocade, wrapping around Shimei. Bai, Chang, Xie, Zhe. Each light band shimmered with a single word. "What is this?" The old demon said, "Clan tree, which family has the most powerful bloodline and which family's belt of light will be linked to the young master's wrist." Shimei stopped talking and looked down at the colorful ribbons. "Qin, Fei, Wang, Shangguan, Zhongli, Luo, Ye, Duin, Chu." The old demon chanted non-stop, but after a long time, there was still no ribbon falling. His forehead couldn't help but wrinkle and he lifted his eyes to look at Shimei's face. Shimei also calmly looked at him. Looking at him, the old demon smiled in embarrassment and continued to speed up his incantation. As he chanted, a red ribbon wrapped around his arm, and he raised it thoughtfully to examine it. "Is it this one? What's your surname?" He looked left and right, but before he could take a good look at the words on the ribbon rapidly withered and turned black, turning into fine powder in an instant. "Shimei." The old gatekeeper was also silent for a moment, frozen in place, looking at him in disbelief. Shimei slowly raised his gaze a few inches. In his heart, he already had an answer, but he still asked with a smile, "What's wrong?" The old demon's face changed, his nose wrinkled and he shouted, "Divine blood descendant." Shimei paused for a moment, then he sneered and carelessly brushed away the black dust on his wrist and said indifferently, "My father is indeed a descendant of the gods, but so what? I have never done half an inch of the god race's business in my life, and I have always taken the task of returning the demon clan home my responsibility. It's not like I have that much dirty blood on me. If you put on a godlike hat for me, then that would be too." Before he could say anything, he saw the old demon, who was guarding the door, wrapped himself in a black gust of wind, forcing Shimei to take a step back. The wind dispersed and the hunchbacked old demon disappeared. What appeared at the entrance of the demon realm was a skeleton monster with intersecting fangs holding a giant axe. The monster suddenly hacked the axe in its hand onto the ground, blocking the path of the people from the butterfly-boned beauty feast clan, and shouted angrily towards the sky with a hoarse voice. Since ancient times, gods and devils have never been allowed to collude with each other. The path of martyrdom cannot be completed. Quickly, get the reviled beings like you out of the demon territory, close the demon door. With its shout, the demon gates on the left and right moved and started to close towards the center. The recently completed bridge of martyrdom also collapsed with the terrifying sound of an avalanche from the distant Shizun peak. End chapter. Dumb Husky and his white cat Shizun. Chapter 307. Shizun Peak, the dusk of bats. What's going on? The butterfly-boned beauty feasts in the back couldn't see the commotion in front, and they even stretched out their necks to look around anxiously. Although Chu Wanning's tall dam was sturdy, it was nothing more than a mound in front of the vast ocean of the 9 prefectures. Seeing that the Tianwen and Juga formation had begun to shatter and water was flowing out of the vines, the butterfly-boned beauty feast's hands and feet couldn't help but fall into disorder. Someone near the gate shouted, "What happened? Why won't you let us in?" Some people looked back and their expressions changed drastically. The path of martyrdom is collapsing. What? As a result, butterfly-boned beauty feasts were trapped in the middle. The gate to the demon realm in front was closing and the demonic bridge behind them is collapsing. Beneath their feet was an endless abyss. Where could they flee to? In that instant, the entire scene turned into a mess. Shi Mei shouted in a stern voice, "Everyone, come to the front, don't panic." Grandmaster Hua. Shi Mei raised his voice from the front, "I said that I will bring you home." This was something that he had been working for 2 lifetimes, and it was also his mother's long-cherished wish before she died. At this point, he would no longer have the slightest intention of backing down. "But Grandmaster, how can we possibly have the ability to fight against the demon envoy?" Shi Mei turned his eyes, his hazel pupils reflecting the doomsday scene. "Before we could not fight, but now." As he said that, the panicking butterfly-boned beauty feast's clansmen suddenly remembered something. Because of the chi flowing out from the opening of the demon realm, they had more or less recovered some of their demonic spiritual energy. Shi Mei ordered, "All of you retreat behind me and gather together to slow down the destruction of the path of martyrdom." "What about you, Grandmaster?" Shi Mei looked at the skeleton waving the axe and said, "I'll go defeat him." With that, the demonic skeleton roared and pounced forward. "Be careful, Grandmaster." Shi Mei didn't mind at all. He had never received such a violent flow of spiritual energy before. This demonic chi roamed about within his body, making him unable to advance forward. Fact was, the butterfly-boned beauty feasts should be such a powerful clan, but because of a single individual's betrayal, they had to suffer such injustice for thousands of years. With hatred in his eyes, he set his palm on fire and threw it towards the skeleton without a word. The skeleton flashed and the fireball crashed into the magic door, leaving a charred mark. "How dare you, traitor!" Shi Mei said angrily, "What blood is flowing in my body? Is it my fault?" Because of the blood from the clan of Gushin's mother who were exiled to the mortal realm, it was difficult for me to form a spiritual core. Because of the blood of a descendant of the gods, I was rejected and could not return to my demon family. What did I do? What did the butterfly-boned beauty feast clan do? How is this treason?" The skeleton only repeated in a solemn and stubborn manner, "A traitor, you dare to act rashly." It was like a Buddhist prayer from a monk. It looked like a golden body made of yellow clay. It was obviously such an ethereal thing, but it was so natural. In the sky, Chu Wanning was doing his best to resist the torrential currents. In the distance, the cultivators had mostly retreated to the intersection of the 2 mortal worlds, where they set up the black tortoise armor formation. In front of him, Shi Mei was in a life-or-death battle with the demon skeleton. Everyone had their own missions and choices. Perhaps they had crossed swords before, but at this moment, none of them had the strength to fight to the death with the other. When the punishment of fate finally arrived, people's faces were all similar. but he was unwilling to surrender. Grand Master, the path of martyrdom is about to collapse. We can't hold on any longer. Some of the young butterfly-boned beauty feast couldn't help but cry in despair. They were crying, their wails filling the strong winds and squeezing into the ears of their Grand Master. It was as though he was back to that year. His small and frail body had slammed savagely into the ice-cold stone door of the Tianyan pavilion. When the door opened, he saw his father with blood dripping from the corner of his mouth and his mother with her bones and flesh separated. He heard his mother screaming as she dragged her bloody body against the ground. "Run! Run! Run, get out of here! Run, to a place where we can eventually live together with all the bullied clansmen." That was his mother's lifelong wish, the reason he sold his soul, his body, and finally his life. Run. So, in the end, what part of me has let the demons down? This was his last question and he did not intend to wait for an answer. Shimei jumped up, dodging the demon skeleton's axe attack. Following that, he moved agilely like a kite, with his knees sinking down. He knelt on the skeleton's shoulder, and grabbed onto its skull that was moving left and right. The road shook more and more under their feet and the bridge that was built from Zhenlong chess pieces quickly collapsed and the corpses fell into the endless abyss. They couldn't even hear the echo of the falling pieces. Shimei looked up and saw his clansmen huddled together, trying to force out the demonic energy they had just gathered, trying their best to slow down the destructions of the Bridge of Martyrdom. They were pure-blooded butterfly-boned beauty feasts, birds that returned to their nests together. And what about him? There was the sound of bats flapping their wings in the abyss. A cold light flashed on Shimei's palm, a thorny thorn suddenly appeared, condensing the demonic chi. He raised it high up and aimed at the skull. Then suddenly stabbed down. Was that a bat? A bird soaring in the sky? Or a beast crouching in the darkness? Maybe neither side would recognize him. His blood was dirty. No matter where he went, he would only be a traitor. A few moments of deathly silence. The skull crashed to the ground. In an instant, it transformed into 10,000 black dots, disappearing without a trace. But at this time, the closing of the gate to the demon realm had reached a dangerous point. Shimei jumped up and flew high into the air, using his flesh and blood to halt the closing of the giant gate. He turned his head and looked down on the bewildered butterfly-boned beauty feasts who were still in tears. He snapped, "What are you waiting for? Run! Run! Run!" Huagui's last scream was like a ray of light piercing through the clouds. Even after 20 years, his heart had still been torn to shreds. "Anan, run!" When he closed his eyes, he could clearly see that her arms had been torn open, the bones of her legs broken, and she was writhing in a pool of blood, fighting a battle to the death. She threw herself forward and grabbed her husband's legs, just to give her child a chance to live. "Run! Run! Don't look back! Don't come back!" The man stomped down and her face was smashed. At the last moment, she did her best to say, "Run! Kaka!" Her throat was broken. Shimei clenched his teeth and poured demonic chi into his body. His bones creaked, but he still tried his best to wedge himself between the gate and the demon realm, preventing the gate from closing. He looked down. Sweat was seeping out of his forehead and his lips were bitten and bleeding. His entire body was trembling, his muscles and bones were about to be crushed. Although the closing of the demon gate had slowed down, its strength had not relaxed in the slightest. 1 inch, 2 inches. 1 chi. 2 feet. Veins popped out and his face turned red. However, he still looked at the flustered crowd and said hoarsely, "Run! Faster, faster! I said we'd go home." Even though his hands were covered in blood, tens of thousands of people still cursed me for betraying their masters and exterminating their loved ones. I have done all the wrong things and I have done everything for this cause. But I'm not a traitor. It was as if his bones were about to be dislocated and grind to pieces. Yet he was still holding onto that enormous door, truly laughable. Ants could support the heavens, mayflies could shake trees. At this moment, he suddenly heard a loud bang not too far away. Shimei lifted his sweaty face and peered through the tears in his eyelashes. He saw Chu Wanning being hit by the waves of heaven's retribution. The dam built by Tianwen and Zhuge was broken into pieces. After his Shizun fell from the sky, the dam he was struggling to maintain collapsed. He saw Chu Wanning being thrown into the water by a huge wave with his own eyes. Shizun. The dam collapsed and the flood could no longer stop. With the force of a bamboo breaking, it swept towards the intersection of the two worlds, leveling the mountains and buildings as it filled the ravines and empty valleys. In the blink of an eye, everything had sunk into chaos. The human world was not the same as yesterday. The blue sea had already turned into mulberry fields. Just at this moment, the pressure from the demon realm increased by several times. Shimei felt that his bones had been broken and tendons had separated from his body. His spiritual power was overdrawn and he suddenly coughed out a mouthful of blood. He lowered his head and looked down. There was still a dozen or so people who had yet to pass the gate. He did not know where he got the strength from, but he let out an angry shout. His eyes were about to crack and the meridians in his neck were popping out. He used all his strength to block the door that was about to close. Grandmaster Hua. The butterfly-boned beauty feast who had passed the gate were all gathered below, watching him. However, at this time, Shimei couldn't see their faces clearly. His vision was blurry, everything was blurry. The last 8. 5. 3. His face twisted with pain, a smile of revenge blossomed with joy and love, blood trickled from his mouth and his teeth were bright red. What fate, what demons and men, what hindrances to his journey back home, all of my previous efforts have been wasted. Not yet. He could still win. His heart was as hard as iron. This was an unshakable stubbornness. In the end. 1. Run. Not to mention mayflies can't shake trees, as long as the heart is firm, ants can also break the dam. Hadn't he managed to do it in the end? Bang. A loud sound was heard. The gate to the demon realm suddenly closed. Instantly, darkness and red intertwined before his eyes. What was red was blood while what was dark was the sky. The last sound the bat in the crevice heard was a crisp kaka. His hair stood on end. Was it the shattering of the top of his head? It was the echo of his mother's broken neck when he was still a child. Grandmaster Hua. Grandmaster. Along with the loud closing of the demon gate, the butterfly-boned beauty feast clansmen's mournful wails were cut off from the rest of the world. The gate of the demon realm was dripping with blood. Between the cracks, Hua Bainan's broken limbs were falling down. However, right after that, a huge wave came and washed away the hundreds of millions of corpses on the path of martyrdom. After the wave passed, the gate to the demon realm disappeared. Only Shisheng Peak remained, sinking into the waves of the vast sea. The sky-reaching pagoda collapsed, the Red Lotus Pavilion was destroyed, and the roof and tiles of Loyalty Hall were instantly swallowed up. Chu Wanning coughed a few times. Several times he wanted to call out to Huisha, but his spiritual power was already exhausted, making him unable to do so. Another sky-turning wave came by. The water pressure hit Chu Wanning's chest, bringing with it a piece of broken driftwood. He sank deep into the sea, wincing in pain and unable to breathe. He wouldn't be able to hold on to anything to save his own life. His white robe fluttered in the water and his hair was scattered. He was sinking fast. The halo before his eyes slowly faded and he was unable to breathe. Gradually, he felt his soul leaving his body. Xuemeng and the others, they should have already retreated to the Black Tortoise armor formation. Would they make a mistake in the future? And Emo ran. Emo ran. He slowly opened his eyes. In the cold water, the light of the sky was far away and a few wisps of air bubbles appeared on his lips. He was lying on his back in a daze, probably choking to death, when he began to hallucinate. He saw a dark figure coming at him like a mermaid, so close that he could see the familiar features, the dark purplish pupils and even the small, disjointed scars on his face. It was a trace left behind after his corpse had been dismembered. Chu Wanning suddenly closed his eyes. He must have been being too ruthless. So in the end, even the illusion before his death tormented him. He said in a hoarse voice, "I'm sorry." He opened and closed his lips, but only tiny bubbles came out. Suddenly, a hand tugged at him. Before he could even react, he fell into a firm and wide embrace. His chest was extremely cold and didn't have the slightest bit of warmth, but even the sea water seemed to have evaporated by the wild aura on his body. Chu Wanning. He heard someone calling to him. Wanning. In his scattered consciousness, there was a person covering his lips. His lips were slightly cold and a strand of spiritual energy flowed into them. Buletangui, come. In a split second, a ghostly jade-green brilliance rushed out from the sea water. The man grabbed it and brought it with him towards the surface of the water. In the blink of an eye, they broke out of the water with a hua sound. Chu Wanning was drenched from head to toe. He was naturally cold and shivering in the cold water. His lips were green and white without a single trace of blood. After panting for a while, he suddenly realized what had happened just now. He suddenly raised his head and met the pair of deep, moist eyes. They were no longer confused and lost, but rather cold and clear. Amoran was also panting slightly. His lips were slightly opened and were somewhat moist. His black clothes were also soaked through, sticking close to his tightly muscled chest. He just stared at Chu Wanning, not saying a word. Who is this? Was it a puppet or a living person? Taxian Jun or Grandmaster Mo? The jut in Chu Wanning's throat bobbed up and down. He was about to speak when a drop of salty water slid down his forehead and into his eye socket. He closed his eyes. They were red. The moment he closed his eyes, the man embraced him, his slightly cold lips touching his forehead. Was I too late? Now that the shackles that Hua Bainan put have been removed, no one can control me anymore. He kissed his forehead, his eyes almost popping out of their sockets. Taxian Jun looked at the eyes that slowly opened. He raised his hand and ruffled Chu Wanning's hair, then looked at the world that was flooded with a torrential flood. His voice was low and dull. Let's go. I'll send you back to your world. End chapter.